Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever in the world you are. It is my pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank the organizers of the meeting for inviting me to be here and to participate in this panel, Global Genetics Towards a Socially Just Practice, a view from North America. That's my charge, to give a view from North America. When I think about a socially just practice, social justice, what does that mean? We're thinking about the idea that every human would have the same rights and opportunities. And we know that social justice incorporates a range of identities, a range of issues, a range of topics. But today in my 10 minutes, I'm going to focus on race and racism. And I'm not going to cover all of North America either. I'm going to zero in on the United States. And what I'm going to do is to give a little bit of background in terms of where we are now with race and racism in America, and offer a framework that some of us are using to try to dismantle racism in America, and offer that as a potential model, a potential framework, a potential strategy for the genetics and genomics community to utilize in its effort to move toward a socially just practice. I'm sure that everybody, most if not everybody who's watching, is well aware of all that's transpired in the United States with regard to race, at least the major things with regard to race and racism over the last, I'd say, 5 or so years, in terms of a palpable resurgence of racism and overt racism. The protests that have ensued over the last year have really brought it to the fore, both in terms of the United States, and I have here images of protests across the United States, but also globally. And you who are watching are in countries where there were also huge protests. So the issue of race, even though it travels differently in different parts of the world and in different countries, the world understands race and racism. Understands it at its core in terms of its destructiveness. And so the world responded to what was happening or continues to happen in the US. And the COVID-19 virus just added on to what we know has been happening, but in terms of laying bare the injustices and the inequalities with regard to health and society as a whole. These images also show that race and racism are not just about Black and white people. We saw the incidences of hate crimes against Asian Americans, and the image you see on the bottom left there is one of those demonstrations that happened more recently in response to that. So we're all affected by race and racism. And then a very poignant image from January 6th, the insurrection on the Capitol, that showed the Confederate flag on the right, on my right, a symbol of white supremacy, a symbol of racism, and then the American flag on the left. This is where our country is very divided, and we're grappling with how do we address racism this time? What do we need to be doing differently? And the scientific and academic communities are not exempt. Though some may feel that race and racism is a society's problem and society needs to fix it, there are others who recognize that science is part of society and also informs what happens in society. And genetics as a science is also part of the academy. And so in June of last year, the academy also became part of that movement to reckon with race and racism. So as we think about where do we go from here? How can we address racism in a way that's proactive, that will provide sustained change? Because we've been here before, in terms of the civil rights movement and Reconstruction, and the history of our country. And for many people, it seems like we've gone even further back, and further beyond that era. And the TRHT, Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation process strategy, was developed by the Kellogg Foundation, one of the premier philanthropic organizations here in the US. And one of their senior vice presidents, Gail Christopher, came up with the TRHT, Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation process strategy for addressing racism, specifically racism. And it was informed by the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that South Africa and other countries have had. But she chose to use the word transformation as opposed to reconciliation, because she realized that the US was built on separation. It was not a situation where we were together and then fell away from each other, and then now we need to be reconciled, as it was in some other places. So reconciliation, as at least in terms of this movement and the heart of the movement, reconciliation is part of the process of transformation, but it's not the whole. In our view, the whole system needs transformation. And so this movement that was created there in 2016, the idea was developed and the framework was created. And now there are hundreds of community-based organizations, academic institutions, libraries, and various entities in all sectors across the country, many sectors across the country, including political, because there's also legislation in Congress to establish a TRHT commission. We'll see how successful that will be. But the bottom line is that the work is happening. And one of the things that made me gravitate toward the TRHT strategy, the TRHT framework, is that in the whole movement is based on the idea that for so long in addressing race, we've focused on the consequences, race and racism. We focused on the consequences, health disparities, wealth disparities, education disparities, and have not really gotten to the root cause. And that is what Gail Christopher, in thinking about how do we do things differently, is that we have to get to the root cause, because unless we address the root cause, it will never really go away. And the root cause is the ideology of a racial hierarchy. And when she talks about it, she talks about the Human Genome Project and about genetics and what genetics says about who we are as humans in relation to one another, that we're one people. And the idea is to try to get us to understand that and understand our interconnectedness. And so this movement, as she said in a quote here, envisioning a country, and it's developed primarily for the US, but has global implications, of course, that we want to get to a place where we don't believe in this fallacy. And studies that I have done and others have shown that a large percentage of Americans believe that we do have these biological races and that some are superior to others, and so on, and getting to the point where we jettison that idea. And so they developed a framework. They brought together in 2017, 2016, brought together almost 200 academic leaders, researchers, community-based organizations, leaders of community-based organizations and others, to develop this framework, a holistic framework that starts with, includes narrative change. What are the stories that we need to change? Such as what is race and what it's not, what race is and what it is not. And these are some of the entities across the top there that you see, sectors where we need to change the narratives or tell more truthful or more complete narratives. Racial healing and relationship building. Recognize that racism is a separation problem. Separation is a big part of it, in terms of people feeling that they're different from each other. And the more we separate is the more likely we are to keep people fearful of each other. And so needing to build relationships, being intentional about it. It's not just talking about building relationships, but being intentional about building relationships with others. And then separation law and economy with all other racialized groups that we've been separated from or fearful of. Separation law and economy, some of the primary tools of racism. We, the Center of the TRHT Center at Duke, we we adopted that model, we changed it a bit, we modified it a bit, and really just putting separation law and economy together in what we call structural revolution. And the idea is that the structures are part of what we need to change, and that those structures differ from one organization to another. And when we apply this to entities on our campus or in our community, we tailor this model to whatever is going on, whatever the structures are in that group. And I want to do that just for a minute or so with you, and just thinking about what are the narratives that need to change? What are the stories that we tell in the genomics community that we need to change? What are the stories that we need to tell more truthful versions of? One of the big stories, of course, is what race is and what it's not. And the genetics community, more than many other communities, academic communities, can lend and bring expertise to that, not just in our sphere, not just in the US, but globally. But also, what are the stories that we tell in our field about whose research is valued and who's valued in the research arenas within which we work? The building of relationships. A lot of effort is going into DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and that's important because we do need to do that and make our field more diverse, more inclusive. But that's not the be all and end all. We can build, we can bring in and develop more diverse labs and research teams. But unless we build relationships with the people in those teams, we're not addressing the root of the problem in terms of helping people to understand how similar they are to one another, and also appreciating the differences that we see. And that goes for our fellow researchers and research teams, but also the communities within which we work. And then thinking about the structures in terms of the genetic societies, the leadership of those societies, the policies that we make, and how race and racism make their way into those policies. So I'm going to end with a quote from another architect, another American architect, Buckminster Fuller, who was just a phenomenal designer and thinker and inventor, but also a champion of social justice, an implementer of social justice, a catalyst for social justice on a global scale, global homelessness and food insecurity. And he gave this quote: "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." And that's what I offer to the genetics community as we think about how we become more socially just, and as we move toward that, and thinking about truth. What are the truths that we need to tell, the complete truths that we need to tell? How can we heal within our societies, or all the genetic societies, and within our countries and between? And then how can we transform the structures that exist? Thank you.